The moment the lights went out, someone screamed. Not a loud, panicked scream, more like a sharp intake of breath that escaped before the brain could catch it. Then silence. Deep, complete silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like a blanket pressing down on your ears. In that darkness, 20 strangers held their breath and waited for something, anything, to happen. Then a small, trembling voice spoke from somewhere near the back of the carriage. "Is everyone all right?" It was Maya. And she had no idea that those 4 words would change the course of her entire evening, and her heart. It had started as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The kind of day that doesn't stand out in your memory, the kind that quietly fades into all the other Tuesdays of your life. Maya had finished work early, treated herself to a hot chocolate at the station cafe, and found a window seat on the 4:15 train heading north. She put on her headphones, chose her favorite playlist, soft acoustic songs, the ones that made her feel like she was in a film, and watched the city slowly dissolve into suburbs. Then fields, then woods. There was nothing remarkable about any of it. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray. The trees were bare, their black branches reaching up like veins against the clouds. A few other passengers were scattered around the carriage. A young man in a suit typing furiously on a laptop. A teenage boy with his hood up scrolling through his phone. An older woman near the door knitting something soft and cream-colored. Nobody spoke. Nobody made eye contact. It was exactly the kind of journey Maya liked. Quiet, anonymous, peaceful. She thought about her plans for the evening. A warm bath, maybe? A video call with her sister, who had just moved to Edinburgh and always had funny stories about her new flatmates. Leftover pasta from the night before. Nothing exciting but comforting. The kind of evening you looked forward to precisely because nothing would happen. And then the train stopped. Not slowed down. Not approached a station. Just stopped. The brakes let out a long, low sigh, and the train came to a complete halt somewhere between 2 towns, surrounded by nothing but fields and bare winter trees. Maya didn't notice at first. Her music was playing, and she was lost in thought. It was only when the song ended and a strange silence followed that she pulled off her headphones and looked around. The carriage had gone quiet. The laptop man had stopped typing. The teenager had looked up from his phone. Even the knitting needles had paused. Maya looked out the window. There was no station, no platform, no other trains, only the darkening sky and a distant line of trees, their branches moving slowly in the wind. A crow sat on a fence post, watching the train with a tilted head, as if it too was wondering what had happened. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay," came a crackling voice over the speaker. "We are experiencing a minor technical problem. Please remain seated and wait for further instructions." A minor technical problem. Maya had heard those words before. They usually meant a 5-minute wait, maybe 10. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. No need to panic, but 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. The heating system, which had been humming softly in the background, suddenly coughed and went quiet. The temperature in the carriage began to drop, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Maya pulled her coat a little tighter around her shoulders. The laptop man sighed loudly and closed his computer. The teenager put his phone away and stared out the window, his breath making a small fog on the glass. The knitting needles had completely stopped. The older woman was looking at her watch now, then at the window, then at the door at the end of the carriage. There was something about the way she held her hands, tightly clasped together, the half-finished scarf resting in her lap, that made Maya pay attention. It was the posture of someone who was trying very hard not to look worried. Another announcement, this time even harder to understand. The conductor's voice was thin and distant, as if he was speaking from the other end of a long tunnel. Technical problem? Waiting for assistance. Thank you for your patience. Patience, Maya thought, was becoming a very expensive currency. She stood up, partly to stretch her legs, partly because she wanted to see if there was anything visible from the other side of the train. She walked to the window on the opposite side and looked out. More fields, more bare trees. But in the far distance, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a faint cluster of orange lights. A small town, perhaps. It looked warm and alive, a little pocket of life in the middle of the cold, darkening countryside. She stood there for a moment, her hands in her pockets, wondering if the town had a station, wondering if anyone on this train had family waiting there, wondering what her sister was doing right now in Edinburgh, and that was when she heard it. A quiet voice, just behind her left shoulder. "Excuse me?" Maya turned around. It was the older woman with the knitting. Up close, she looked younger than Maya had first thought, perhaps in her early 80s with soft white hair and kind, tired eyes. Her hands were still resting on the scarf, but they were trembling slightly, not from cold, from something else. "I'm so sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm afraid I might be on the wrong train." Maya stepped closer. "The wrong train?" "Yes, dear. I was supposed to get off at Middleton. That was 2 stops ago." She paused, and Maya saw her throat move as she swallowed. "I was visiting my daughter. She'll be waiting for me at the station. She always waits, you see. Ever since my husband passed, she worries. She'll think something has happened." Maya looked at the empty seat beside the woman. A small handbag, a folded newspaper, the knitting bag with its ball of cream wool. Everything neat and tidy, as if the woman had been sitting there for hours, perfectly still, perfectly alone. "What's your name?" Maya asked gently. "Margaret. Margaret Albright. But everyone calls me Mrs. Albright. Well, they used to, anyway. My husband was Mr. Albright. Now it's just me." She smiled, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Maya sat down in the seat beside her. "I'm Maya. And you're not alone right now. Mrs. Albright. Let's figure this out together." The story that unfolded over the next hour was one Maya would never forget. Mrs. Albright told her about her husband, George, who had been a school teacher for 40 years. Every morning, he would make her a cup of tea and leave it on her bedside table before he went to work. Even when he was ill, Mrs. Albright said, her fingers tracing patterns on the soft wool, he would get up and make that tea. He said it was the most important part of his day. George had died 6 months ago, a heart attack, sudden and quiet, in the middle of the night. Mrs. Albright had woken up and found him beside her, peaceful, as if he was still dreaming. She hadn't traveled anywhere since then. This trip to visit her daughter Emma was her first journey alone in over 50 years. "I thought I could do it," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was ready. But when I looked out the window and didn't recognize the station, something inside me just froze. I've been sitting here ever since, too embarrassed to ask anyone for help." Maya reached out and placed her hand on top of Mrs. Albright's. It was cold, but it was steady. "You're asking now. That's all that matters." Just then, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. A collective gasp swept through the carriage. The teenager swore under his breath. The laptop man stood up and started pacing. Outside, the world had gone completely dark, the orange lights of the distant town now swallowed by night. But Maya didn't panic. She didn't shout or stand up or demand answers. She simply reached into her pocket, took out her phone, and switched on the flashlight. She held it up high, so the light spread across the ceiling and bounced down onto the seats, filling the carriage with a soft, warm glow. "Does anyone else have a phone?" She called out, her voice calm and steady. "Let's light this place up." One by one, other lights appeared. The teenager held up his phone. The laptop man did the same. Even a young couple sitting at the far end of the carriage switched on their torches. Within a minute, the entire carriage was filled with small pools of warm light, like a cluster of candles flickering in a dark room. Mrs. Albright looked up at Maya, and for the first time that evening, her smile reached her eyes. "You remind me of George," she said. "He always knew how to bring light into a dark room." Maya felt a lump rise in her throat. She squeezed Mrs. Albright's hand. "Then let's keep the lights on together." She helped Mrs. Albright use her phone to compose a text message to her daughter, even though there was no signal yet. "When we get closer to a town, it'll send," Maya explained. "We'll write it now so it's ready." "What should I say?" "Tell her you're safe. Tell her you're on your way. Tell her someone is looking after you." Mrs. Albright typed slowly, her fingers careful and deliberate. When she finished, she looked at the screen for a long moment before handing the phone back to Maya. The message read, "Darling Emma, train delayed. Don't worry, I've made a friend. See you soon. Love, Mum." They sat together in the soft glow of the phone lights, talking about small things, favorite recipes, the names of Mrs. Albright's grandchildren, the way the world had changed since she was young. Mrs. Albright told Maya about the first time she had ever seen a mobile phone. "It was the size of a brick," she laughed. "George said it would never catch on." They both chuckled, and for a while, the cold and the dark and the uncertainty faded into the background. When help finally arrived, an hour and a half later, in the form of a slow, rumbling rescue locomotive that pushed their train to the next station, Maya didn't leave Mrs. Albright's side. She walked her off the train, bought her a hot tea at the station cafe, and sat with her on a wooden bench until a tall woman with red hair and tear-streaked cheeks came running through the doors. "Mom," Emma cried, throwing her arms around her mother. "I was so worried. The station said the train was delayed indefinitely. I didn't know what to think." Mrs. Albright hugged her daughter tightly, then turned and gestured to Maya. "This is my new friend. She held the light for me." Emma looked at Maya, her eyes still wet. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much." Maya just smiled and shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just stayed." On the last train home, a quiet, uneventful journey under a sky full of stars, Maya rested her head against the window and watched the lights of passing towns flicker in the distance. She thought about Mrs. Albright, about George's cup of tea, about a carriage full of strangers who had turned their phones into lanterns. And she thought about how easy it was sometimes to feel alone in a world full of people, how easy it was to forget that a single small light, held high enough, could be seen by everyone. She never did finish her music that day, but somehow the silence felt just right, and the world, for all its darkness, felt just a little bit brighter.